I wish I could tell you I ruined everything in a single dramatic moment. One push of a button, one drunken confession, one cataclysmic choice that neatly explains how I set fire to the life a good man built with me. I didn't. I broke us in 100 small, greedy motions that felt harmless at the time. There was no cliff edge. It was a slope so gentle I barely noticed I was sliding until I couldn't stop. If you want the ugliest truth first, here it is. I took his trust and fed it into a machine I didn't understand because a handsome idiot at my gym said guaranteed, with expensive teeth, and when the machine started chewing, I threw more in. When that wasn't enough, I forged his name. The first time I saw Cade, he was spotting a guy on bench press like he was born in a commercial. Jawline sharp enough to open mail, backwards cap, tank top that announced discipline in block letters. He laughed loudly, people looked. He saw me watching and winked, and I laughed because grown men don't wink without irony and because it felt nice to be noticed. My husband, Matthew, notices me in the soft ways. Tucking the blanket around my feet when we watch TV, swapping the dead bulb before I realize a room got dim, leaving my favorite pen out where I'll find it the morning I need it. There's an old saying that stable love is the one that keeps showing up with groceries. Mine did. I went looking for fireworks anyway. Cade started talking to me at the water fountain. It was all surface level at first. What program was I following? Had I tried creatine? Did I want to join the 6 a.m. grind crew? He had a way of talking like he'd already let you into a secret, and you should feel lucky. The third conversation we had, he used the word opportunity 4 times. The fifth, he told me how he'd retired at 28. Retired from what? I asked, smiling. He grinned wider and said, from needing a paycheck. He showed me his phone. Numbers in a line chart rocketing up, a trading app with green confetti bursting on a deposit screen, screenshots of messages from other investors congratulating each other with rocket emojis. I didn't understand what I was looking at, but I knew what it felt like. Someone opening a door in a wall I'd been pressing against since I learned what rent was. I brought the energy home to Matthew like a weather system. He was grading papers at the kitchen island. High school physics, tiny neat equations in his students' earnest handwriting. And I said, you ever think we're being dumb with our money? He raised an eyebrow without looking up. He knows my tone when it arrives with trouble hitchhiking behind it. Define dumb, he said. I made a dismissive noise. Our savings sat in a high-yield account that earned interest the way you earn loyalty points on a debit card. Slowly, politely. Our retirement contributions went into funds with names that sound like vitamins. We were careful. Boring. Responsible. There are people making real returns, I said, and he looked up at last, the corners of his mouth twitching. Real returns are either illegal or a typo. I told him about Cade. I left out the wink. I said friend from the gym, instead of man who insists on calling women queen. Matthew listened like he always does. He asked what the product was. When I said crypto index arb fund, Matthew smiled the way he smiles when students try to prove that perpetual motion machines exist. If he can arbitrage reliably, he won't need you or your money, he said. If he needs you, he can't. I rolled my eyes so hard I felt the muscles complain, and said he didn't get it because he lives in the world of syllabi and rubrics where everything moves predictably if you push it hard enough. He said gently, or I live in the world where numbers have to add up. The first wrong thing I did was small. We had a home repairs line item in our budget. $200 a month to catch the leaky faucet that will become a flood if you ignore it. I put $600 from that line item into Cade's starter tranche. That's the word he used. Tranche. It made what I was doing sound like something people who wear suits do, not something fools fall for. I told myself it was my money because I cooked the meals and I chose the paint color, and anyway Matthew would never notice a dent in a bucket he himself calls just in case. I told myself I would replace it before anything broke. I told myself it wasn't even a lie, because he never asked. Cade invited me to a strategy call, which turned out to be a Zoom with 12 faces I didn't recognize and one guy who wore aviators indoors. They threw around phrases like market-neutral delta hedging, and safe yield, and whales moving BTC to cold storage, which is a bullish signal. And when I asked if I could withdraw any time, Cade smiled and said, T+1 baby. We're nimble. I nodded like I knew what T+1 meant. I learned later. It means tomorrow more or less. If he had said tomorrow, I might have felt the right amount of caution. The letter and number made it feel official, like something printed on a prospectus. I watched the line on my app creep up over the next week. I made dinner and put on music and said nothing about trying to earn us a good surprise. I moved numbers around on a spreadsheet like I was God in a garden, naming animals and giving them homes. Matthew found the leaky faucet before the month ended. I'll grab the part on the way home, he said, kissing my forehead. Plumbing aisle date? I laughed, relieved the universe hadn't immediately punished me for touching the just-in-case bucket. I checked the trading app and saw green confetti burst again. I told no one. I'm fixing the faucet too. The second wrong thing I did felt even smaller than the first. Once the 600 became 740 on the little chart, I told Cade to roll it. He used that phrase all the time. Roll your winnings back in. Let the compounding work while we sleep. It felt like being industrious in my dreams. You have to understand, I grew up with a mother who kept her cash in an envelope with a rubber band around it, because banks made her nervous. I learned to iron dollar bills at 13, so the rent looked respectful when she handed it to the landlord. The idea that money could make money without anyone counting it or sweating for it made me breathless and a little nauseous. I wanted to be the kind of person for whom money swam back to the boat when you cast a net. I still hadn't told Matthew. It's not that I thought he would forbid it. He doesn't forbid me anything. He trusts me to be an adult, which is perhaps why it felt like such a delicious teenage thrill to act like one while sneaking around like the other. He noticed I was on my phone more and said, "Memes getting better?" And I said, "They're all about cats now." And he snorted and went back to reading the novel he assigns his juniors in the spring. He is 8 years older than me, and sometimes that gap makes me feel safe, like I married a man with a map. Sometimes it makes me feel bored, like I married a museum docent who knows exactly how the tour will go. Both feelings are my fault when I choose what to do with them. The first real hit arrived on a Thursday morning 2 months in. Cade messaged the group chat at 5:12 a.m. Heads up. Exchange freeze. Liquidity crunch. Funds temporarily locked. The words temporarily and heads up do an enormous amount of work in that sentence. They held my panic at a low simmer while I brushed my teeth and packed my lunch. Matthew kissed me as he left for school and said, "Big lab today," and I smiled too brightly and said, "Break a beaker." At noon, Cade posted a screenshot from the exchange's Twitter. Withdrawals paused to protect customer assets. The comments were a burning building. He followed with a video, deliberately calm, talking about counterparty risk and "we have lines into support, this will be fine." I reread the tiny print on the deposit screen where it had said risk of loss. I realized I hadn't read it at all when I clicked agree. I took a walk around the block and told myself that $600 is not a catastrophe even if you are poor. I wasn't poor anymore. I was married and middle class and trying to grow up into something slightly more comfortable. I told myself if the worst happened, I could tell Matthew the truth and he would be mad and then he would say, "We'll cover it," because that's who he is. Then I told myself I didn't have to tell him if I fixed it first. That night, Cade called me. He never called me alone. "You're one of the sharper ones," he said, which is a sentence men like him use like a lockpick. "We're bridging funds from another venue. If you can top up, you can buy the dip of a lifetime. Easy double on a 2-week horizon." The part of my brain that knows what a sentence like that means, nothing, emergency, scam, was drowning under the part that wanted to be in the room where it happens for once. "I don't have more," I said, which was true. "Not in the envelope sense." He said, "You're married, right? 2 incomes? You got equity you can pull." I said no quickly enough to feel virtuous. He said, "Small line of credit then." "No credit check. I've got a partner who can approve. We're doing this for the team to keep everybody whole. I can get you $5,000 at 0% for 120 days if you're in the top-up tranche." The phrase "keep everybody whole" slid into me like a knife wrapped in a blanket. Look how noble we're being, I told myself. We're rescuing the others. We're bridging liquidity like heroes in a movie with lasers and heists where the good guys cheat math to save the world. I said okay. He said he'd send me a link. The link took me to a slick page with a logo that looked like a bank's if you squinted. The application asked for my information. Then it asked for household income and co-applicant. And I paused like that counted as a boundary. I didn't type Matthew's social security number. I didn't have to. Our bank app, in the name of convenience, fills those boxes if you tap the wrong thing. I tapped. There it was. There he was, appearing like I had summoned him. I stared at the line asking for consent to pull co-applicant credit, and chewed my lip so hard I tasted metal. I told myself I would tell him as soon as the freeze lifted. I told myself this was just paperwork. I checked the box. The approval came back in 6 minutes with a cheerful green check mark. $5,000 now available. I moved it to Cade's portal and said I felt sick. He sent a flexing bicep emoji and said, "You'll feel great in 2 weeks." That night, Matthew and I ate leftovers in our pajamas and watched a nature documentary where tiny birds do a dance like they're inventing ballroom. He put his head on my shoulder. I thought, I am going to make you a breakfast so good when this is over that you will forgive me without knowing you forgave me. I thought, I am going to pay this down before the first statement. I thought, I am doing a bad thing out of love, which is the kind of sentence you only get to say if you want to admit you're a villain. For a week the portal showed a line crawling back up the hill. My stomach unclenched a little. I made pancakes Saturday and didn't burn them. Matthew went to the farmer's market and brought back carrots with dirt still clinging to them and said, "Taste this, it's what a carrot is supposed to be." We kissed in the kitchen like we always do when the sun hits the counter just so at 9 in the morning. For a few hours I forgot that I was floating above a hole I had dug myself. The second freeze didn't come with a heads up. The page wouldn't load. The group chat went silent. Kate stopped replying to anyone. A woman whose profile picture was her toddler in a dinosaur hoodie typed Kate 16 times. I called him voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I paced the hallway like a caged animal and told myself my body was overreacting because my body loves drama. I told myself to breathe. I didn't tell Matthew anything. Not when he came home with a little bouquet of marigolds because they were the color of October. Not when he fell asleep reading and I turned the light off and lay staring into the dark with my hands on my chest counting my heart like it might tell me what to do. The bank called Matthew the next morning. I was in the shower when I heard his voice, not loud, just higher than usual. I didn't apply for a line of credit. I turned off the water with soap still on my shoulder and stood dripping and cold, listening to him say our address, listening to him say, "No, my wife is here, we can both come in." I wiped myself off with the towel and wrapped it around me and opened the bathroom door. He was in the hallway with his phone to his ear. He looked at me like a person who has just remembered he left the stove on. No anger yet, just the incoming knowledge that something bad is happening that he should have prevented and didn't. He covered the receiver. "We're going to the branch," he said, as calmly as if he'd said, "We're going to the store." I said okay. My heart thudded so hard I thought he would hear it and he did. His eyes flicked to my throat as if he could see the pulse there. He ended the call and put his hand on the doorframe, and then took it back like the house might tell him which sentence would make this untrue. He didn't ask me anything. He went and got his keys. The branch smelled like coffee and laminate. The manager ushered us into a glass-walled office the exact size of a confession. Matthew sat. I stood because the chair felt like a trap. She printed out the application. My name. His name. The box checked that said consent. The electronic audit trail, with a timestamp at 12:07 p.m. And our IP address and the note, autofill from connected account. Matthew stared at the paper like staring might rearrange the letters. He traced the line with his finger. He looked up at me. "Did you?" He didn't finish the sentence because he is a kind man who does not shove people toward their worst version of themselves if he can help it. I nodded. Then something broke in my chest, and words came out in a flood that felt like vomiting. I told him about Kate. About the first 600 and the confetti and the temporarily paused. About the bridge and the second freeze. About how I had told myself, household income meant our money, and consent meant I will fix it before he notices. About the way I had turned him into a signature instead of a person. He didn't shout in the bank. He didn't do anything dramatic. He put his hand flat on the table the way he does when he's explaining a physics problem and said to the manager, "What happens next?" She talked about a fraud claim they could open, to protect the account while we investigate, and disputes may be denied if there is evidence of consent, and your credit utilization will reflect this balance until resolved, and in the future, set up two-factor authentication that texts both parties. I nodded at everything like I was helpful. Matthew signed the paper she put in front of him, carefully, with his full name and a flourish on the T I've always loved. He thanked her. He apologized for taking up her time. He held the door for me when we left. In the car I tried to start sentences, and they fell apart on my tongue. He drove us home. He unlocked the front door. He set his keys in the little dish. He turned to me and said, "I'm going to take a walk. When I come back, we're going to call the police." I made a sound like a hurt animal. "No," I said, failure and pleading braided together. "I didn't. Matthew, I was stupid, I didn't mean." He shook his head once slowly. "I'm not going to charge you," he said, and it was so absurd that I almost laughed. I'm going to tell them I need to document that someone used my identity without my active knowledge. He paused. Because that's what happened. He opened the door again. He looked tired. He looked like a person watching his own house burn and knowing he can only save some rooms. He called the police. He logged everything. He printed the group chat and the portal screenshots and put them in a blue folder because that's the color we use for important household stuff. He called his sister and asked if her husband could recommend a consumer protection lawyer, and her husband called back and said he could come over in an hour. I sat at the kitchen table with my face in my hands and listened to my life become a project managed by a man who deserved better work. The lawyer was young in a way that makes you believe he runs on coffee and indignation. He listened. He asked questions that cut away my excuses like apple peels. He said words I didn't want to learn: wire fraud, identity theft, unauthorized use, civil liability, criminal exposure. He said other words like they might still matter: restitution, mitigation, voluntary disclosure. He looked at me and said, "You need to write down everything. You need to stop talking to this Cade. You need to stop touching the money. You need to not lie again." Matthew sat there with his hands folded and nodded at appropriate moments. He did not glare at me. He did not hold my hand. When the lawyer left, Matthew washed the coffee cups and set them upside down to dry. I watched him do it and thought, this is what decency looks like in practice. A man who cleans the cups even when he would be justified in smashing them. The bank denied the fraud claim a week later. The audit trail was too clean, the autofill too damning. The police report sat in a database someplace as a case without a real defendant, because Cade's real last name wasn't the one he gave us. The lawyer helped Matthew draft letters to the credit bureaus. He helped us set up freezes. He told me I needed to send a letter of my own, documented and contrite, acknowledging what I had done and committing to repay. He told me this wouldn't fix the credit score overnight or the marriage at all. He said these words without cruelty. He asked me if I was working with a therapist because this pattern usually isn't about money. I said yes, even though I hadn't made the appointment yet. I made it that afternoon. Matthew did not humiliate me. He did not die on the hill of, but she's my wife. He didn't hide what I did from his family or ours to protect my image. He told the truth in the quiet tone of a teacher writing on a whiteboard. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. Then he packed a bag and went to stay with his brother. He didn't slam the door. He said, "I will send you a spreadsheet tonight." And he did. It laid out the balance on the line of credit, the minimum payments, the interest after the 0% period ended, the 3 paths we had depending on whether I found work to cover it faster. It noted in a new tab the cost of separate apartments, the timeline for mediation, the name of a counselor he would agree to see if I wanted to try. It ended with a cell highlighted in yellow that said simply, "Choose." I could tell you about the next month like it's a montage. Me selling the Peloton that had become a coat rack, me taking on extra shifts at the bakery where I worked weekends for the fun of it, and now relied on because fun was cancelled, me sitting across from a therapist who didn't let me wriggle out of saying the words. I wanted to feel special, and I made myself the kind of special that rots things. But that would be generous to me. What it felt like was this: waking up every day to an inbox full of my own name attached to shame. It felt like walking past the marigolds Matthew had brought home, and watching them drop their petals one by one into the little ceramic dish like a countdown I couldn't reset. It felt like waiting for him to text and learning that dignity doesn't make a sound. Cade resurfaced once in the group chat to post a slick video about regulatory capture and unprecedented headwinds, and we are building back stronger. Someone whose profile picture had been a vacation photo changed it to a black square. Someone else posted a link to a local news story about an arrest in a neighboring county of a man who had run a crypto pool that looked like ours. The face didn't match Cade's, the script did. The woman with the toddler picture wrote, "My husband left." I typed "I'm sorry," and didn't hit send because nothing I could say belonged there, not as comfort and not as performance. Matthew came by on a Sunday to pick up his winter coat he had left in the front closet. He texted first, "I'm outside." I opened the door and saw him on the step like a version of himself that had been turned down in color. We stood 6 feet apart and said hello like neighbors. He asked how I was. I said working. He nodded. He said, "I've booked the mediator for the 14th. And I said okay, and then, because the truth was a habit I was trying to build like a muscle, I added, "I'm paying $300 a week toward the balance." I got a second job at night. He looked at me for a long second, the kind that used to end with a kiss. He said, "Good." And then he said something I wasn't ready for. "You should call your mother." He stepped back and let me close the door. He didn't ask to come in. He didn't ask to stay. The mediator's office had soft chairs and a bowl of hard candy nobody touched. She asked us what we wanted. Matthew said, "Clarity." I said, "Another chance, because I have always been the one to ask for extra credit after failing a test I didn't study for." The mediator nodded and said, "Those may not be incompatible." We talked for 2 hours about accounts and apartments, and whether anyone gets to keep the good dishes if nobody stays married. Matthew kept his hands folded. He did not look at me when I cried until I stopped, and then he looked at me like a human being again, not a crisis. He agreed to counseling. He agreed to a 6-month separation instead of filing immediately. He agreed to nothing else. He did not agree to pretend this was a bump. He did not agree to language like mistake when pattern was more accurate. He did not agree to be my probation officer while I performed remorse. He said he would meet me at the therapist's office every Tuesday at 5, and he did, walking in with a notebook and that patient face that makes difficult kids sit up straighter in his classroom. The first session, he said, "I don't care about the money." The therapist asked what he cared about. He said, "That she turned me into a checkbox." I thought about the autofill. I thought about how I had clicked and made him appear like a vending machine dispenses soda, like you are entitled to what you've paid for. I said I was sorry. He said, "Say that to yourself first." The therapist said, "Good," and wrote something down. If you want the moment he won, I can tell you the precise second I understood that I would not be the hero of this story. It was in session 4 when the therapist asked, "When did you stop telling Matthew the truth?" And I opened my mouth to reach back to the water fountain at the gym, and he shook his head once and said softly, "No." Before that. I saw it then. Not the gym, not the portal, not the line of credit. But the year before, when we decided to wait on a second bedroom because I wanted to start my own business soon, and he suggested we save another 6 months first, and I smiled and said okay, and then spent $2,000 on branding and a ring light, and called it, investing in myself, instead of, I don't want to be bored. It's not that the ring light ruined our marriage. It's that I had been auditioning for a life that didn't include him long before I met Cade, and I mistook the applause in my head for a sign from the universe. Matthew didn't say, "I told you so." He said, "I want you to want a life we both live in." And I cried in that ugly, hiccuping way that makes you feel like a cartoon drowning in your own speech bubble. We're not back together. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He keeps his dignity like a coat he never takes off now, even in rooms where it's warm. He comes to counseling. He pays the mortgage because his name is on it, and I moved into my sister's spare room while I take on triples and send money to a balance that has my worst day attached to it. He sends occasional texts that read like memo lines. "Dog groomer Tuesday at 4, your dentist called, you missed the reminder." He does not send good morning. He does not ask if I ate. He does not flirt accidentally the way long married people do when they share a joke only they get. He does not punish me by being cruel. He punishes me by being decent from a distance, and every inch of that distance is a yardstick I have to measure my own growth against without asking him to hold it. If you're looking for advice, I don't have any that doesn't sound like a fortune cookie that should have been obvious. Don't invest money you don't understand with men who call you queen. Don't use your spouse's good nature as collateral. Don't use autofill on anything that matters. Don't confuse feeling alive with being reckless. Do not. This is the most important one, the only one that might save you if you've already ignored the rest. Do not turn the person you married into a form. Sometimes I take the long way home from the bakery and drive past our house. His car is in the driveway. The marigolds are gone. Frost got them. In their place are mums in pots, burgundy and gold, ridiculous and brave. I sit at the curb and imagine knocking and saying, "I have the next payment receipt," like that will earn me a cup of tea at the counter and a half hour of silence with him nearby. I don't knock. I go back to my sister's and make dinner for her kids, and let my niece show me a TikTok dance until she is giggling breathless, and I realize for the first time in months that laughter doesn't have to cost anything. I still get emails from the exchange with boilerplate updates. I still get messages in the group chat of people bargaining with reality 5 different ways. Screenshots from lawyers, screenshots from news, screenshots from other screenshots, as if the right arrangement of pixels will reverse time. I muted the chat. I kept my police case number in my wallet like an ugly ID. I paid another $300 this week. The balance shrank by an amount that is both meaningful and meaningless. That's the thing about debt, financial and otherwise. You pay it, and you pay it, and you pay it, And for a long time it looks like nothing is changing, and then one day you look up and realize the numbers got small while your spine got straighter. I am not there. I am somewhere in the middle, carrying the buckets I filled myself. If we end, it will be in a quiet office with pens on chains where we sign papers and hand each other copies and say take care, like a curse that grew into a blessing. If we don't, if we find our way back through this thicket, it will be because we kept our appointments and told the truth even when it tasted like metal, and didn't ask the other person to clap when we did the bare minimum of decency. Either way, Matthew already won. He didn't win me or a fight or a narrative. He won himself, which is the one prize nobody can bestow or steal. He will carry that into his next chapter, with or without me, his back unbent. I want to tell you I have a plan to make it all right, but plans are what got me here. Plans with numbers that only go up, plans that require other people to be exactly who you want them to be, plans with arrows instead of contingencies. What I have now is smaller and more honest. I have Tuesday at 5. I have a second job and a third alarm clock. I have the ability to look at a checkbox that says consent and see a person. I have a screenshot of a spreadsheet cell that says choose, and a life in which I keep doing it, one unremarkable day at a time, without fireworks.